Welcome to the Future of Solar Photovoltaics podcast. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Mr. Rob Tippett of Bluefield Operations, Managing Director of a FTSE 250 listed solar fund, and also one of the up-and-coming major contractors in the industry, Mr. Liam Hicks, co-founder of Dynamic Energy Solutions. I'll first start with Rob. Rob, welcome. Are you able to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your early life and background?
Absolutely, and thanks Vikram, thanks Liam. So I'm Rob Tippett, Managing Director of Bluefield Operations. We carry out the O&M services for Bluefield Group, the BSIF fund. So I'm not Managing Director of the fund itself, but the operations team. We've got 50 personnel around the UK and in the office. I suppose start with how I got here, really, my early life, all that kind of stuff. Grew up in Cornwall. My parents had a civil engineering company, and they did environmental surveys across the UK. I spent most of my holidays, most of my breaks working for them on the survey crews. That was quite enjoyable, getting around the UK, Scotland, Ireland and places, working with older guys. Very health and safety driven. We're working in confined spaces, rivers, coastal areas on the road as well, which is obviously quite a dangerous place to be. Went to study environmental science at Plymouth University. Had a good time there, but with environmental science, you kind of find yourself a jack of all trades, master in none. It was a good experience to have. I knew I wanted to work outside. I knew I wanted to work in the environmental sector, but ended up back with my parents' company. So working back on the cruise straight after university. Obviously did the bit of travelling in between. Instead of doing a gap year working, I ended up doing a gap year working my way around the world, which was obviously a lot more enjoyable than just sitting in a job. I feel I was also more aligned to vocational routes rather than academic. So although I enjoyed university, I wouldn't say I was very good at it. I learned through experience. I learned through kind of seeing it and doing it. So, yeah, as I said, after university, worked back for my parents for a number of years. Ended up working overseas, in Belgium, Bulgaria, sort of Eastern Europe, Middle East, Hong Kong for a while. Again, all around the UK. And then my parents decided to sell the business, probably when they were about 45. I was sort of my early 20s. I think previous to that, I thought there was an expectation from me that I would take the company over, but I was too young. I felt I was too young. It wasn't an option for me at that time. And I thought, well, hats off to them. They can sell up. They can go and do their thing. So they were bought out by a company called RPS. I carried on working there for another 8 years or so, probably a bit longer than that. Ended up managing the operational side of the business. We had 70 staff, mostly field service engineers. Again, health and safety heavy, working in confined spaces, up to 2,000 gases that can kill anybody, sort of fatal gases in the sewer networks. Working at height. So obviously you've got to drop people into the sewer, you've got to get them out again, or into the rivers and that kind of stuff. So a lot of these things, working in the wastewater industry, has really fed into how I'm able to influence how the current operations business can improve, can maintain high safety quality and delivery. But also the data as well. So the data we used to collect on those environmental surveys was really sensitive equipment, routinely calibrated. We would use that data to verify mathematical models, and the mathematical models would be used by the big water firms, utility firms around the UK to make informed decisions on multi-million pound infrastructure improvements or flooding incidents and things like that. So, data quality was key. Health and safety was key for us, and quality was good. So, we had ISO 9001, 14001, 18001. I didn't really appreciate at that time, at such a young age, the importance of those processes to go through, those steps to go through. So after a number of years working at RPS, I moved into solar, working for a small company down in Somerset, small little developer, primarily focused on commercial rooftops and small commercial systems. But they had O&M on some small ground mount systems up to sort of 2 meg. They delivered a lot, but working for a small company, as I'm sure you're aware, both of you, you have to wear many hats. Mm-hmm. It's a real challenge, and there's, even with good clients and customers, it's still a challenge. You've got to adapt. You've got to just drop the priority at that moment to move on to another priority, which you might be moving from the finance side to the quality side to let's get the contract, or let's go and actually put some solar panels on the roof. That kind of flying around. But that got me into solar. Worked there for 4 odd years and then moved to Bluefield, which is where I'm now. So started off as a portfolio manager, looking after the sites from the office perspective. And then I'm now managing director 5 years later.
Fantastic. I completely get what you mean by small companies. I run my own small business called Ventus Limited, and when I was first visiting solar customers, the first objection was, who the hell's Ventus? What happens if you go bankrupt? So I'm very grateful to the support I've had from my partners, especially Leone, which is Tudor Cables now. But today something's a bit special because we're joined by Mr. Liam Hicks as well, and because we are talking about repowering and O&M, as well as covering your own personal profile as well, Rob, because I think that's important in building transparency and trust and showing people the kind of person you are. So before we go deeper into how you go into solar, getting to health and safety, transformers, repowering, discussing the future of solar photovoltaics and some of our memorable experiences, I would like Liam to just spend about 30 seconds introducing himself, explaining how he knows you, Rob, and what he brings to the party with respect to O&M and repowering.
So thank you, Vikram. Liam Hicks, co-founder of Dynamic Energy Solutions. My background is working within solar for the last 10 years. Electrical contractor, commercially and domestically before that. Born and bred electrician, should I say. I've worked quite closely with Rob at Bluefield. Mm-hmm. We had a really good relationship with Bluefield from where I previously worked at Solar Century. Once sort of Solar Century disappeared, started Dynamic Energy Solutions, and we've had a really good relationship with Bluefields moving forward, repowering, O&M support services to Bluefield Operations. One thing I'd like to say is, Rob, I saw the inception of Bluefield Operations, and you came in quite early on, and what you've done there up to now, I think is quite admirable with regards to what you guys have been up against, really, and we'll get deeper into that, I'm sure, later on in the podcast.
Absolutely, and Rob, you mentioned you work for a small solar company, and I'm just looking at your LinkedIn profile. I think everyone does this, and so there's a lot of people that look at your profile and don't engage, which frightens me sometimes, but it's public information. So you were at this small company for just over 4 years. And we are now in an election year. The industry has been a boom and bust cycle in itself as well, and not helped by constant changes. But the Tories are now saying, in the next 5 years, we might face more change in the industry than we've had in the last 30 years. Specifically, this is net zero targets, which some people question even if it's affordable or not. So So with respect to how you got into solar, I can see you started with Solar Southwest in 2014, only 2 years before the Brexit referendum, which is still, the shock for which is still being felt. And I remember quite clearly in those times, minimum input price, cutting feed-in tariffs. It was really an uncertain time. It was nothing like 2011, 2012 when everything was boom and growth. Small companies going into 300 employee businesses. What was your memorable time from working in Solar Southwest?
I think within the first 12 months, I came in on the back end of all the good times, and then within 12 months there were noises, whispers, and reality from the government about what was happening with the industry and how the support was going to tail off. And I honestly was thinking, what the heck have I got myself into? It was very uncertain times. As a small little company, developing small commercial systems, we rely on the technology, but the support and the noise from the government, the messages from the government, and the messages were very negative. It put a lot of people off. I wouldn't say the tap was turned off in terms of supply of business, but it was drastically reduced. And like any other small business, we had to just look at what we were doing, have honest conversations about where we wanted to be. They were quite, they were difficult times. Do we focus on O&M? Do we carry on focusing, or do we focus more on domestic installs? Do we look at the commercial systems? And it all stacked up. It all stacked up in terms of the paybacks to customers, to the clients and potential clients. But actually making those sales, and although I wasn't really directly involved with many of those sales, they were hard conversations to have because people just weren't interested. It was all about confidence, and and that confidence came, or lack of confidence came, from the government at the time. But then I think going through the ISO 9001 process really helped the business from my point of view, because it really centered what we wanted to do. We had, up to that point, some of us really wanted to focus on O&M, some of us because we had some good clients. Do we grow that portfolio, or do we focus on domestic installs? Everyone knows who've worked in the domestic install market, it's cutthroat, and it's by volume. In rural Somerset, we're never going to hit that volume. But it was actually having to sit down and having a proper grown-up conversation about, okay, what are we going to do? What are we doing here? And I think ISO really helped define the purpose of the business and helped us sort of align ourselves to a goal and a target. And that's when I really saw the value of the ISO process. But memorable things, I think getting past that first 12 months, 18 months of uncertainty, and then I think just enjoying the fact that I was still working outside, still realising that dream that I was working in an environmental setting, and I've transitioned from one utility sector to another utility sector, and the learning curve was massive. And I think, being totally candid, I feel that I verified my fear of heights after going and working on so many roofs during those many years. I hate it.
I was product manager for safety at height for Honeywell, but I was scared of heights and at the butt of all the jokes. And I appreciate completely what you mean by ISO 9001, ISO 14001. Our factory in Switzerland, they supply the railways. We need to give massive indemnities, 50 million Swiss francs or 45 million pounds roughly. So there needs to be traceability. I think the Japanese believe, even one small screw getting lost can lead to a train crash. So when you counterbalance that with solar, where a one-man band can grow into a massive company, there's none of those processes, and a lot of it's on private land. You don't really even need to follow many of the regulations, which you should do anyway. But why I got into solar is because Crossrail, which is the Elizabeth line, a £15 billion project, I still haven't got my first meeting, but I've done 2.5 gigawatts solar already. So in terms of career progress and progression, I hear from other clients, colleagues of mine in the industry, even from Liam, if you work for a DNO, you might be waiting 10 years before you're doing switching or work in certain environments. In solar, you're thrown in the deep end from day one. And I can see that from your progress as well, and I want to talk a bit more about that, because you started as an O&M manager at Bluefield, and now you're the managing director of the O&M department or the O&M company. But one of the great things about this podcast is we can make an impact for young people, for mature people from other industries, because there is a labour shortage, especially a skilled labour shortage, and bringing good people in who have good ethics and want to do the right thing is very, very tough. And we want to look at your inspiring stories like yourself and Liam, and try to inspire other people. And one of the things you can do is in these moments of pause is to reflect. So I can see you had quite a technical uni background. You did, even though you said you're not very good at it, you did a very relevant subject in environmental science. Are you able to tell us a bit about what you studied and what your sort of dreams and ambitions were, and what your view on climate science is in general?
Yeah, no problem. So I actually started off doing a degree in coastal management up in Scarborough. It was part of the University of York, but I quickly figured out after 1 year, although I did very well in that first year, that I had far too much free time on my hands, and I spent most of that time not studying and socialising. And let's just leave it at that. So I moved. I went down to Plymouth to actually what I thought was doing a proper degree, proper university. Although it was a proper degree at a proper university, and I did see it through. Got my degree. It was. I suppose what it did do is formed and confirmed my appetite for working in the outdoors. I say that I'm office based 100% of the time at the moment, but also working in the environment and making environmental improvements. You could see even back then there were massive red flags going up about climate change or the impact that humans are having on the climate. As I said, I did a year studying coastal management, and that was quite eye-opening and fascinating about, how you can protect one area of the coast, but what you're actually doing is you are saving that bit of the coast, but 2 miles down the coast, you're exacerbating another issue and causing a bigger problem. A massive domino effect, absolutely. And that was playing out in almost every single subject that I was looking at or studying, every single module at university at Plymouth. And it was a bit eye-opening. And I suppose, just talking about climate science or the climate impact that's having at the moment, I think, from my experience, I look at all the health and safety incidents that come in from the guys on site and the office team. I feel that the weather events are getting more extreme. They're getting more severe. The storms are the winds are getting harder. The rain's getting harder in small, intense bursts. Flooding is getting more common. And even in the heat in the summer, which obviously impacts all of and all these things impact the solar sites. We've got to think, and the industry's got to think about not just how we fix the current issues, the OPEX stuff, but we also got to put in place mitigations to allow those sites to work and operate in those future conditions. We've got to be thinking about the mounting structures. We've got to be thinking about the substations and the transformers overheating, or obviously not overheating. We've got to think about flooding. We've got to think about look at the flood risk assessments that I've done at planning stage, and actually maybe go one step further and put those substations maybe another couple of feet in the air, or whatever it is, or Liam and I have done a lot of work on, well, not me specifically, but the team with Bluefield, but doing a lot of environmental controls in substations, looking at HVAC systems and looking to dry out the bases of the substations just to prevent that humidity, for instance. So yeah, it's it's visceral what's happening, and you get an understanding when you see the incident reports coming in, and it's really important that we continue to report this stuff, but also we act on it now, especially in design for new sites.
Yes. So I think you're right there with regards to the new sites that are going in, maybe a bit of future proofing for the kind of climate we're heading for.
Absolutely. And moving on to now the Bluefield. You started off as an O&M manager about just over 5 years ago, and you've risen to being managing director. What has been the recipe behind your success?
I don't go as far as saying right place, right time, but it's a little bit of that. I joined rather fortuitously at a time where the business, the O&M business, the ops business had just set up. So it'd been around since 2017, I think it was set up. I joined in 2018. In that period of time, the operations team in Bluefield were basically looking after third-party O&Ms, and probably only about 100 megawatts of sites. When I joined, and then a colleague of mine, Ben, a couple of weeks later, we looked at it and we thought, okay, this is a challenge. We want to actually have our own engineers. We were joined about a month later by a chap called Howard Johns, and then we ripped it all up and started again. We got our first engineer, Alex Lyneham, in it probably started January 2019. And we had to build the whole business from scratch. There were no safety processes, there were no operating practices, there were no vehicles, no fleet, no not even any designs of the logos or anything like that, no PPE, no tools, literally starting from scratch. So, in that time, that first sort of 2 years, it was, I think Ben and I felt that we were hanging on to the coattails of the partners and Howard with their expectations of where the business needed to be. Mm-hmm. But I suppose what we were lucky with is that we managed to find some really good staff. We were lucky in that we've got a very good staff retention rate, and those really good staff are still there in the business, and they are the backbone to the business. The team we built, we didn't want any kind of massive characters in the office team. We needed a team that would work together and collaborate and actually deliver the work that was needed. But it's the same with the field service engineers. Masses of experience. I wouldn't even like to calculate the number of centuries that the combined knowledge that they've got in solar. Mm-hmm. But the ex-OEMs, ex-military, ex-navy, they come from a variety of different sources. Ex-O&Ms as well. We've got a lot of our competitors, especially locally around Bristol. They've joined Bluefield and joined the project that we've got going. And, just having that continuation, having that team grow together and trust each other and collaborate, it's really had an impact. And I suppose, how did I get from portfolio manager or whatever I was back then to managing director? I don't know. I put my hand up. I was brave enough to put my head forward and apply for it and go for it.
And you've stuck at it because there's a lot of great people that work for Bluefield. One of the principal engineers from Bristol Renewables, Hugh Murtha, who I worked with quite closely for a very short burst of time for Shotwick Solar Farm. He's in Australia now, I believe, working for Beon. It might be a subsidiary of PowerCore, which is a sister company of UK Power Networks. A lot of people don't know that. And he was at Bluefield for a while. Valerio, who I network with and drink with occasionally, sometimes a bit too much. He was at Bluefield. Dr. Jyoti Roy, who we've done a podcast with, he's a few doors down from where I live. He was at Bluefield. And of course, during the early days of the gold rush, a very interesting chap, Mr. Francesco Girardi, who very nervously took to the factory on audits, hoping not to get banned at Soul Century or other EPCs. He was one of the few people from the funds that took an interest in the actual details. So from my perspective, you've been one of the longest lasting individuals within Bluefield, and it shows if you stick at something, it can pay dividends. And you write in your personal statement, you're managing 675 megawatts across 75 sites. Are you able to comment about what are some of your challenges on these sites and what sticks out to you?
Absolutely. Just going back to your Francesco comment, I mean, right. Francesco he's the detail. The devil is in the detail for Francesco, and he's working his magic over in Italy at the moment. But just going about how I became MD, I suppose trust works both ways. Yes. I believe in the project. I believe in the visions that the partners have got of the operations team and the whole group itself. And they trust me to do it as well at the same time. So I think it's, we've mentioned trust a few times, but I think trust within the industry, with our peers, with our suppliers and everything else is so important. It's the bedrock of our business as well. We trust each other. I'm not asking my engineers to do timesheets. I just trust them to do the work. It's the same with the office team. I don't want to micromanage anybody. It's up to them to do the work that they think is needed, and if they need help, they can ask for it. So the question, going back to your question, which I've forgotten about, by the way.
That you've lasted a very long time, and I basically, because I've been working in this industry for over 12 years full time now, a lot of it comes to me like flashbacks, because as some of these people are met under very stressful circumstances, good or bad. So I mentioned that in a flash, so I wanted you to comment a bit about Francesco, because I see him as a friend. He's very charismatic and awe-inspiring sometimes, and so I wanted you just to mention him for a bit. He's still at Bluefield, of course, but you've lasted longer than many other people that have come and gone, because O&M is a stressful industry, because you're carrying the can for people that built assets in the rush under enormous pressure without proper ISO 9001 processes. Sometimes the panels will be on the water and the feed-in tariffs will change. So lots of things that could go wrong did go wrong, and so I just wanted to just congratulate you for lasting so long, and also as a hint to people listening that if you do apply yourself, you do see rewards. But my question was based around your notes. You wrote that you're managing today 675 megawatts, out of which you may have some of the sites that even I worked on with Solar Sentry and with Bristol Renewables and others in the past, such as Wursel. RAF Lyneham, it's a memorable site for me. Of course, I don't speak about anything confidential or any commercial secrets or anything like that. But in terms of what you deal with on a day-to-day basis, out of these 75 sites, what sticks out to you as your main challenges at the moment?
I think thanks for the reminder there. I think the issues and challenges that we face are not uncommon for the rest of the UK solar fleet and the O&Ms and the supporting businesses like Lyneham and Datham Supply. The rush 10 years or so ago to get these systems accredited and online and energized, that was one part of the problem, or one part of the issue. I think a number of other challenges are just being realised now. I think O&Ms, when you scratch the surface of some of the sites, you identify many other issues with cable sizing or ducting or lack of ducting, that kind of thing. Component selection at the time may have seemed like a really good idea, may have been really beneficial for the balance sheet or the financial model, but the reality is during the operational phase of the asset, it's not, in some cases it's just not working. And I think that's really important to stress. You go to trade shows and trade events, the Solar Energy UK have solar storage, and then you go to over to Munich to Intersolar and Barcelona for the event in January. A lot is talked about the development phases, a lot is talked about the components, but the biggest the biggest phase, operational phase on a solar asset is the O&M, is actually looking after them, making sure they perform and generate the widgets that are being able to sell to the PPAs in the open market. And I think more emphasis is needed industry-wide about how that is going to develop and how that is going to be improved. So going back to specifics, we're seeing a number of we've had a number of issues with HV on transformers. Maybe it's poor design or poor specification. Learning instances through the industry, but not just solar. We learn of other issues through maybe switch gears and safety notices through switch gears. But the assets that we maintain, they're coming up to, on average, probably 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. We're coming to this phase in their life cycle that they do need some more investment, and that's happening now. We're set up as a business to deliver the operations and the maintenance, the planned preventative, and to fix things, get things back online. As a business, we're not set up to deliver the bigger projects, and we engage with other specialists for those services. People like Dynamic, who've been really helpful on a number of projects over the last couple of years. So a number of the issues that have been identified, we are addressing at the moment, and there are plans to address more in the coming years. But it will, there's not a finite list of things. There's a long list, and there's a lot to do.
Absolutely, there's so much to unpack, and we are tight for time because to talk about last 10-12 years in one day it's an impossible task, and we will catch up offline as well. But a passing comment I just want to make about trust and my own experience with dealing with Bluefield and everyone else in the industry. Of course, the whole world's gone upside down since people started working from home, and we had the energy crisis, increasing interest rates, and labour shortages, and almost some companies are almost have begging skilled people, engineers, to stay with them because people change their lifestyles completely. I've almost always worked from home. I have no issue with working from home, but trust is essential, which is dependent on communication with your colleagues, with your suppliers, with the people that you work with. How do you manage your team, and how do you instill good communication between your sites, your colleagues, and your contractors?
Yeah, it is a challenge. I think what we set up during the first day of COVID and lockdown was something that we still do. We have a daily meeting with the office team just to make sure that everyone's appraised of any activity on the sites. And obviously, as the portfolio grows and the team grows, that's becoming quite an event every morning. But as you say, communication is absolutely key. I'm a huge advocate of face-to-face. You can solve so many more problems being together in an office or to getting together in a meeting than you can over Teams or any other route. Saying that, we've got the technology. We have got Teams. We are lucky enough to be able to work in certainly the office teams, the engineers will never get away with it, but in a hybrid situation, you can do a couple of days at home, or you can do most of your time in the office, or whatever suits you. But there's nothing like getting together. Liam and Dathan have been down a couple of times. Other suppliers have been down a couple of times. We try and engage industry events with suppliers and other contractors as well. We found it difficult, and one of the other issues, which I didn't mention earlier, about issues with the industry or with the portfolio that we maintain, is that a lot of those older components or older manufacturers, some of them aren't around anymore. That's a challenge, and I don't think that's unique to Bluefield. I think it's industry-wide. They're either not around anymore, or those original designs are not supported anymore. So you've got to make a decision. Are you going to keep going? Are you going to try and repair those at component level or inverter level? Or are you going to consider revamping? And there's a lot of questions. You can't just rip things up just because the supply is not around anymore. There may be other clever solutions around. And it was interesting. I listened to one of your podcasts with John Davies, and he's a big advocate of getting the data and understanding what the real issue is before you invest heavily, on the millions of pound scale in addressing a problem. But those OEMs, if they're not supporting those technologies anymore, then what do you do about it? So there's a lot of scope, but there's a lot of potential for new work streams for people like myself and people like Liam, in helping out solving these problems. Back to communication, I think we've had some very difficult conversations with OEMs on the continent in recent years. Lack of support being one of them. Lead times, which is not their fault, but we get it in the neck if something's not delivered on time, or the lead time is 18 months plus. Those hangovers from COVID still exist. Those hangovers from Brexit still exist, unfortunately, in terms of supply. I think the electrical industry it's nice to think we're in this little bubble of it's all about solar, it's all about keeping plants running, but the reality is we're just part of the jigsaw puzzle. There's electric fleet, electrification of the fleet, electric vehicles, there's computers, there's mobile phones. The industry is massive and we're just a tiny part of it. So in terms of the value that those chip manufacturers during COVID placed on the solar industry, it was negligible because their turnover is elsewhere. So we got to think differently as an industry. We got to look at different solutions, and we got to be smart about it.
Thank you very much. I absolutely believe in climate change and climate science, and it's almost like talking about religion or what political party you support. But the scientists are 100% clear. We are heading for catastrophic climate change. There is urgency. There's also national security interests. There's issues with energy supply and security, and having some control over it. And in no other industry I've seen progress be so fast, because I worked at Lab before, I worked at Honeywell before, and also for software companies indirectly through cable and wireless. A new product would take several years in development. When solar projects were executed by EPCs, there was developed several new products in a new design, all at the same time, under difficult circumstances. And one of the continuity good things about working with the funds like Bluefield, like with Foresight, in the past with Arnold Claren, who's done a podcast with us as well, now he's at Quintas, is that you guys get to have a long-term view on things. And one of the objections that Arnold raised on the podcast preparation notes was, where did you get the budgets for proper O&M from?
Budgets for proper O&M? I mean, yeah, that's one of the issues about O&M in the UK. It's typically, if you go out to the third-party market, it's a race to the bottom on O&M fees, and we're not set up for that. To properly maintain a solar farm, you need to be there. You need to make sure that it's running, that it's operating properly, and to do that, unfortunately, it costs money. So we're never going to compete with the lowest price O&M companies. We're happy to work with those clients that want to maintain their assets. I mean, at the end of the day, the asset is king. The asset is what we're all here to do, is to, certainly in the O&M sector, is to maintain and look after and maximise the availability and maximise the performance. And I don't think you can do that on a tiny budget. You've got to invest in the plants, not just at component level and future-proofing the sites, but you've got to put the right people on there to actually make the difference.
Yeah, for sure, I agree. I'd just like to touch on some of the O&M stuff in the UK and the different types of quality of build. I think sort of 10 years ago was a very challenging time for solar because there was so much solar being installed, and it was a massive time of innovation. You had the likes of Solar Century and Bluefield building sites, Bluefield as a client, Solar Century as the EPC. A lot of innovation was going on at that time, and there were some fantastic people working on those projects. But there were other projects being installed in the UK that weren't as innovative, and a lot of stuff was installed probably not to standard. Well, definitely not to standard. We know that. We know that based on what we see now. Bluefield are obviously buying a lot of new plant that they didn't build. I'm sure that's throwing a lot of new challenges at you as well. Because, I mean, I'd like to shout out a few of the early asset managers, Beatrice Lopez and Paula Naranja from Bluefields. Those guys were fantastic asset managers. Working with them on the Solar Century portfolio that we had for Bluefield at the time, they were very, very, very attention to detail orientated, and that pushed innovation within Solar Century, and I think it was a fantastic mix. What we're seeing now is we're seeing a lot of installations that didn't have that innovation, that drive for excellence, and that's kind of what is leading us onto the revamping, repowering side of the industry right now, which is rife just as much as the build side. In respect to your existing Bluefield owned plant and the stuff that you're buying now, is it throwing new challenges at you, or do you feel like the team that you've built are able to sort of attack this and get it under management and control in as an efficient way as the stuff that was built for Bluefield?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think if you'd asked me a few years ago, you know, could you just absorb the assets and take them on, I would have said, yeah, absolutely. But, you know, I think time and experience can sometimes give you a better reality of the situation. I mean, I'm not going to, you know, we're no different to any of the other portfolios or large asset owners. There's always going to be problematic assets or groups of assets, and it's just about how you deal with that. And I think the way that Bluefield are not unique, but they are uniquely set up in the sense that we act like an owner-operator. So we've got good communication between the businesses, between the ops team, the technical asset management team, and the commercial team. So all the decision makers sit quite close together. So we realise we find the problem, we figure out what the problem is, and we come up with a solution, and then we deliver on it quite quickly. But as I said before, we're not set up as an operations business to do the big capex works, the big revamps, the big repowers. You know, that's big labour heavy, intense work streams, which we would, you know, look to our supply chain to deliver for us. But as you say, you know, going back to your question, it is a challenge when you do get one or two tricky sites come on, because it's like having a tricky client. You know, you end up giving them all the attention when your good client gets the perception is they get ignored because they're not pestering you all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the same with an asset. You know, you'll get a pesky asset which is always tripping or something happening, and all your engineer time is spent there resolving that issue. But the good site down the road probably gets less attention, but there's stuff building up in the background. So it's a real balancing act. You know, but we're looking to act on the faults and failings as soon as possible, because the longer you leave it, the bigger problem you're going to create in the end. And it's, you know, when we haven't got the resource to do it, we'll go out to market and we'll get some operational excellence from the country, from people like Des and the others.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one thing I will say is credit to you. I've worked alongside a lot of your engineers in the field, and they speak very highly of you, Rob. And one thing I've found and witnessed with Bluefield is you guys do listen to the guys from the ground up. and you do take on what these guys all with this sort of world of experience, they come to you and they say what should be done and how things could be done better. And I think at Bluefield, for sure, your guys have all said that you take it on board, and they do see stuff happen. And I think in the industry, it's something that's rare. And I think it's why Bluefield Operations probably done so well, is because you do take on that information coming from your staff, and I mean the office staff, all credit to them as well. Ben, Adriana, fantastic project managers for those sites, and it really shows. We've worked alongside you, repowering quite a few sites now. Your engineers are always on site. They're always very interested in what's going on, health and safety wise, and with the actual installation. Project managers on that side of things, the repowering side of things, Sean, Carlos, great guys. Working with different companies, it's obvious to see where the championing of being successful as a solar plant owner and operator, it's so challenging. We see it with everyone, and we know exactly how it can be. But I think the Bluefield mix that you've got there is definitely a recipe for success, because although you probably do have a lot of obstacles that you have to, and the hoops you have to jump through, I think it works as being the asset owner and the operator. Fantastic, and yeah, credit to you. It seems to be working.
Yeah, thanks, man. That's very kind. It's nice to have that feedback. But as we talked about already, I started out as a O&M manager, whatever it was, and now I'm managing director. I don't know everything. I've not got all the answers. I look to the people I work for, the engineers and the office staff. I look to them for the answers, and they give me the answers and what they need. And then we have a discussion about it, and we figure out what's the best way forward. Every quarter we have a health and safety committee where everybody's invited. All the engineers, they can come if they want, or they don't have to, but they'll always have a champion from the site or from the region that would say, look, this isn't working for us. It might be down to the PPE they're wearing, or it might be down to the tools they're using. It might be down to a specific SOP that we've developed, and they'll say this isn't working for us, and we'll take it away and we'll rip it up, or we'll get something else, and we just get something that will work for everybody. And it's just easier that way. I think you trust your people and they'll trust you, and I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, you're only as good as your team. I know that all too well.
Yeah.
So what's the SOP?
Safe operating practice,
Fantastic.
Standard operating practice. It depends which seat you're sitting in.
Fantastic. It certainly seems like you guys are professional to have health and safety meetings. We used to do a thing at Honeywell Safety Products called Toolbox Talks. They were always very popular because people are so busy with day-to-day life that they forget to innovate sometimes, or look at what else is out there, and taking a moment to reflect and review does help in driving continuous improvement. I'm a complete solar and electrical geek myself. I work in sales, I run a small business, and there's so many topics that we don't have the headspace for to go into, like module technology. Now we have bifacial modules with reflected energy generation. We contrast that with Southwick Solar Farm, which probably has 270 watt JA solar modules on, and now we're looking at 670 watt modules or more with and there's unknown areas like the albedo, so that sort of gets your nerdy juices going if you're into that sort of stuff like I am, with also string and central inverters, with string optimizers. There's so many things. How do you fuse successfully DC strings? So there's so many things we could go into, but the thing that sobers me the most, and giving credit to Miss Carmen McGovern, my former finance director from Lab, she said, it's cash flow. Cash is king. Cash is what kills businesses. Good businesses don't go bankrupt because they were bad businesses. They go bankrupt because they run out of money. So cash flow is a sobering reality. Staff retention, as you mentioned, sobering reality. And focusing on the profit and loss is a sobering reality, which is why I raised the point about Arne saying earlier, you just need one transformer to go, and your own budget could purely evaporate. And this is why I wanted Liam to be involved with this, because he's successfully done a repowering project with you. And how you get to a point where you develop the business case for repowering, because in development, some sites are selling for £200,000 a megawatt, and they were drawn on a fag packet. And now you've got actual sites that you have to do real engineering, real development. How do you go from a stage where you assess the assets not performing as to expectation, or it's coming to the end of its life, or the parts are obsolete and you need to now repower? And how do you spin all these plates? How do you maintain your module warranties? How do you maintain your voltages? What is the process you go through to get to a repower for a 10-year-old site?
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's a good question. It's there's no one size fits all answer to any of that. But as you say, we've worked with a number of suppliers to realise some revamping projects these last 24 months. They've been very successful. The key drivers in those instances were fundamentally the availability of the OEM to deliver on warranty, to deliver on spares, and failure rates at particular site as well. So they're the indicators that you have at your disposal. Goes back to an earlier conversation we had a minute ago about communication. It's flagging as early as you can the issues that you're seeing on site. The eyes and the ears from the operational perspective of the engineers, and the fault events that are recorded in the control room. So if you're getting 20 string inverters popping every day, then there's an issue on one site. That's quite an easy argument to have with an asset owner.
Yep.
And as I said before, the longest phase in the asset life cycle is the operational phase, and it's probably the least thought about during the planning. Certainly going back a few years, maybe it's different now. I do feel things are improving. You talk about your excited juices coming out with the 600 watt modules and the bifacials and the cables and all those kind of things. I see it differently. I see how are my lads going to change that module if it weighs 50 kilos or whatever it does, or a string inverter which weighs a 250 kilowatt string inverter, and I'm using inverted commas here. That's not a string inverter, that's a mini central. And how are the guys going to lift that off the railing to swap that? That's heavy machinery in use, and that's proper trackways and proper, that needs to be thought through. And I wonder, and Liam and I will find out in 2 or 3 years' time, no doubt, if it has been thought through. So exciting times, more challenges.
Exactly.
I suspect.
Yeah, there are a lot more operational challenges. I mean, just with the voltages, the difference in voltages. The string voltages now are higher than they were, so that comes with a whole load more health and safety aspects to it. And like you said, with the inverters, lifting those bits of equipment on site becomes a real issue, because you need lifting equipment now. You cannot lift some of these inverters by hand. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. The challenges that we have coming, I mean, from a design and installation viewpoint, is fantastic. Innovation again. We all love a bit of innovation, but yeah, I can completely see your point, and we have to think about it as contractors, because we offer a lot of support services to the O&Ms, and we find that a lot of that sort of work as well is subbed out, because the internal teams are very busy doing the operation, that day-to-day operational stuff. So it's something that we as a contractor, we need to think about as well.
Absolutely. It goes back to the communication bit and how you engage with your suppliers. The more diverse the conversations you have, the more answers and ideas and innovation you're going to realise, I think. And it's so important to have those conversations, these conversations that we're having now, and make these connections.
So the truth is a very dangerous thing, and it can rub people up the wrong way. And but for me, keeping the quiet truth on the inside, for me it's like gold. It only gains in value. And on the one side, you've got the sobering reality of budgets and profit and loss and cash flow and sales. On the other side, you have the ethical issues as well. And there's, of course, with capitalism comes greed. And it's a lot easier to develop a solar farm than to build one, or even to maintain one, because you just need to, not all developers are like this, but you just need to spam a few grid applications. You get lucky. you know, charm the landowner. You register a £15 company. You've got an SPV. Suddenly the market picks up and you've got 50 of these sites and you sell them, and you never take the liability of if they're buildable or not, or if you're going to maintain them or not. And so with respect to creative juices and the excitement, it comes from a lot of scary things. Like, I'm dealing with solar farms now. They have 132 kV connections. I'm delivering cables that are 8 tons for 700 meters. 132 kV cable. The ceiling ends to connect them are 100 kilograms per connector. The 670 watt modules, they're over 2 meters tall. Some of them, it's with the packaging. Pallets are 1.2 tons to unload. And people fall out of their chair when suddenly they don't think about these things, because you talk about ISO and everything. Because the greed consumes the industry, there's hundreds of gigawatts of developments. When something closes finance, people get shocked. They don't expect it to close finance. And suddenly you've got 1,000, 2,000 shipping containers turning up full of pallets that are 1.1 ton each, and you got agency labor that don't even know how to unload them. So this is what's going to come to you, but maybe that's the scope for another podcast. But here we are talking about repowering, and Liam, what are your specific thoughts about repowering? How do you get to a stage where you close business for repowering?
Well, I think being an electrical contractor and installer with a operations and maintenance background helps, because we know the challenges of forward thinking, maintenance side of things. We're not just looking to install whatever we're given. We do try to have some input and offer some help to our clients with regards to moving forward. Is this going to be easy to inspect? When we put these, when we connect the hard drawn copper to the piles, we want to have them on the side that hasn't got a ducting in front of it, because when your operational guys are out and they're doing their inspections on a monthly basis, they need to be able to see these things easily. If they've got to get down on their hands and knees and these kind of things, like, we understand that an O&M budget is very tight, so the quicker you can make it, that the checks can be done, the better it is for the client. And identifying those things, relaying them to the project managers, and that whole communication thing we've been talking about and keeps coming up is so key. And working closely with Bluefield personally, we try to offer as much as we can in the way of actually installing it on site. What's best for the site, not so much what's quicker, but what's actually going forward going to be better for the operational guys, because we have that experience behind us, and we know what Bluefield want, luckily, because we've got that history with them. We know how they like their sites to be installed, and we try to offer that up to them, sometimes without them even realising. There's certain things that we do that we know that's the way they like it, and then when we do the walk round, snag lists are small, the work's done efficiently, and it works. It just works for us.
And it seems like communication's a common denominator, because whenever you're going to do something that involves large amounts of money or big change, you naturally will have confrontation, and only good teams seem to pull through that. It's almost an industry secret in the pub that, it's roughly 20 pence a watt for development, 50 pence a watt for EPC, 70 pence a watt to develop and build a solar farm, and then it's on the public record that sites are selling for £1.35 a watt. There might be feed-in tariff, there might be other things involved that we don't quite understand. But to me, it seems you can have 50% margin if you very expensively develop an EPC site for 70 pence a watt, and you can sell it for 1.35 million a megawatt. If you look at the acquisition value of the Toucan portfolio by Greencoat Capital, which anyone can go up and look. So reaching that stage where you can build the relationships and the trust, I still haven't figured that out. Otherwise, I've been retired by now. But there is value in doing things properly. But as we come towards the close of our conversation, Rob, I do want you to mention some of the nicer things to do with the environment, to do with the future of solar photovoltaics. According to Shell Sky scenario, solar will generate twice as much energy as any other power source by 2100, which for me is unfathomable. But you mentioned in your notes about natural capital. Are you able to comment a bit about that for us, and also talk what you think will be the future of solar photovoltaics?
Yeah, well, I'm no soothsayer, but so the future I think is very bright for solar. It sounds very a very common thing to say, but I think it doesn't need government support to stand on its own anymore. It can stand up on itself commercially in the UK at utility scale. Even in, as we're seeing at the moment, volatile markets, it's still profitable business. And I think that will continue. Going back to the environmental piece, what we've talked about earlier on, but when I first arrived at Bluefield, it was very, the way the land was managed was very binary. You cut the grass, tick. You've sprayed the weeds, tick. You've cut the hedges, tick. There was no, at that time there was no kind of thought in how it was done and how it would benefit. We got some guidelines, and there's sort of guidelines in the public domain, and also attached to every single site there is a compliance, basically a list of to-dos to how you to land management practice. There may be certain methods that need to be employed when you're cutting the grass. There may be you may be directional. It might be how you're cutting the hedges. What's typically happened is that the whole hedge is cut every year or every third year or whatever it was. But the reality was you can't be doing that, because what you're doing is you're just completely wiping out the food stock for the birds or other creatures in the hedges for that period of time, and you're decimating the benefits that solar could actually bring. And I think we've been working with the technical asset management team and the owners, and we've delivered a lot in the last 24 months, and we're going to deliver a lot more in the next goodness knows how long, but it's years ahead. We're looking at not just ensuring that the LEMP compliance, that's the landscape environmental management plan, is upheld, but also that we're going above and beyond. We're putting in more habitats, such as wildflower, but wildflower that works, not just wildflower that's done to tick a box. It's wildflower that's managed and maintained, that flourishes and does actually benefit the biodiversity. So there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of conversation around the industry and in the development sector. You look at these big housing developments, these big commercial developments, industrial developments. They all need to meet certain targets. They all need to have 10% BNG, and that's biodiversity net gain. So they need to have more biodiversity in 20 years' time than it was, and they're existing as soon as the shovel hit the ground. With solar, you can achieve that really quite easily, really, really easily. But it's not so easy for those industrial and commercial sites and those house building sites. But there's huge opportunities for the industry to offset the other industries' impact, and they can buy credits from the solar owners. Solar's a unique position. It's hundreds of acres of land, which is not lost to solar, which is an argument we still hear again and again on a daily basis, which is absolutely nonsensical. You've not lost any land at all. You're just generating electricity. You can still farm, you can still graze sheep, you can still do other things. There's going to be innovation in agrivoltaics, absolutely will do, and it's happening elsewhere. It will happen here as well. But there's so much opportunity. You've got long lease, 25, 40-year leases. You've got enough time to actually make a huge impact and increase the natural capital on solar farms, wherein the rest of the UK is fundamentally on the decline, which is a real scary thing to see. But we can, using our position, our very unique position of these long leases, these open, vast stretches of land, we can actually make a difference.
Fantastic. It does give you a warm, fuzzy feeling when you work in things that don't destroy the environment. And, I've been watching Dilly Squat Farm on Amazon. And one of the things that do excite me about the future of solar is to, engage more with farmers and landowners in the future, because intensive farming, it's not sustainable. You actually take all the nutrients out of the soil and you desertify the soil. And you kill all habitats, kill all insects and poison your waterways. So for me, I think not many people understand the environment impact than farmers who are dealing with it on a daily basis. And with Liam by my side, I don't know many other people that are on solar farms as much as you and how hard you work. And as we come to a close to this podcast, do you have any last words, Liam, before we close?
I'd just like to say thank you to you, Vikram, for all that you do for the industry. I think this podcast has been fantastic, and I think that you're very humble. You don't give yourself enough credit for what you've done within the industry and your time when I was at Solar Century and before that. The innovation you've done at the front end and the constant championing of promoting the industry and fighting for it to be a better industry constantly and all the time. Thank you to you, and thanks to Rob as well, because you guys have gave my company in particular a chance very early on. I like to think that we've lived up to your expectations and exceeded in some instances. But yeah, I'd just like to thank you both, and it's been fantastic coming here today and seeing you both in person. We don't get to do it a lot. I'm always in the field, so I rarely see people face to face. It's always over the phone or on a Teams meeting. So yeah.
Thank you, Liam. And you can't take all the credit because you're only as good as the people that you work with. And a young chap called Matthew Zanakis, who is co-founder of this podcast, he's the one that gave me the confidence to start. And Clive Cosby, who made a more bigger thing than it was intended. So thanks very much, Rob and Liam, for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks very much.